Mary Poppins could have been a very different movie. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 15th film in the MCU, Marvel's 2017 superhero sci-fi comedy sequel, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 stars Chris Pratt, Zoe Saldana, and Kurt Russell, and was directed by James Gunn. It continues the story of the Guardians of the Galaxy as they seek to protect the universe from a very powerful relative. The first Guardians of the Galaxy movie was such a pleasant surprise. The MCU had been a pretty consistently entertaining franchise, but that film was their first big risk. It was the first movie that stepped outside of the core four well-known Avengers. The first to really dive into the cosmic side of the MCU, the first to lean into weirdness, and it was also the first MCU movie that was largely comedy-driven. In the time between Guardians of the Galaxy and Volume 2, we were treated to a few more lesser-known character introductions, Ant-Man bringing along more comedy, and Doctor Strange bringing along plenty more weirdness. But even though the Guardians of the Galaxy were no longer the extreme outlier in the MCU that they had once been, I was still very much looking forward to seeing more from this team. Volume 2 certainly delivers on many of the things that made the first film so great, but this movie is far from a rehash of that story. It is a continuation, but it takes a very different approach to telling its story. On one hand, that makes a lot of sense. An origin story is very different from a story about existing heroes, and so each type of film would require slightly different things. But even with that in mind, Volume 2 moves in a different direction than most superhero sequels. It has a plot and a mission of sorts, but this is a film that's far more focused on its characters than it is about anything related to plot. Because I like these characters so much, I thought this borderline character study film was really interesting, but I can see how people who aren't as invested could be disappointed or even bored by the story, especially compared to the MacGuffin-driven space adventure of the first film. This change does result in a slightly oddly structured film that's a little choppy at times and has a few story branches that initially seem small but unexpectedly take over the film. Since this sequel is so character-driven, we've obviously got to talk about the characters some here. Just like in the first film, they're arguably the best part of the movie, and what really makes the film work. Volume 1 saw the Guardians come together to form a team, and this film sees that team truly become a family. The plot does separate the team members into smaller groups for a little while to really focus on individual issues for each of them, but we still get plenty of team interaction too. Baby Groot's the biggest change when it comes to the main characters, for obvious reasons, but his combination of extreme cuteness and inexplicable rage is extremely entertaining. Drax is also remarkably funny in this movie, even more so than the previous film, and he's got a number of great interactions with the other members of the team, including entertainingly naive newcomer Mantis. One of the biggest issues of the first Guardians of the Galaxy was the main villain, Ronan. His evil plot was fine, but as a character, he was just very forgettable. The same cannot be said about this film's central villain, who I'm gonna keep nameless here just in case some people still haven't seen the movie, because it is sort of a heavily foreshadowed reveal late in the film. In either case, this villain is very memorable. Definitely bizarre at times, but characterized much, much more than Ronan ever was. There are a few additional minor villains in this movie, like the wonderfully named Taserface, as well as Aisha and her gold sovereign people, but they're kind of throwaway here. Just like the first film, however, the best of the antagonistic characters are Yondu and Nebula. Both are villainous at points in this movie, but I would not consider them to actually be villains here, and both are very satisfyingly developed and expanded upon from the first movie. Given how comedic the Guardians of the Galaxy movies are, it can be easy to forget just how much heart and emotion they have as well. Volume 2 doubles down on the found family aspect of the first film and makes family its central theme. There's the obvious related storyline between Peter Quill and his father, but this movie really focuses in on the strength and importance of familial relationships that aren't bound by blood. The Guardians are a family, and even though they get separated for a while during this film, and certain characters have existential crises about whether or not they belong, they're still a family. They also immediately extend that kinship to Mantis, who had previously not really had anybody. There's a lot more development of the relationship between adoptive sisters, Gamora and Nebula, in this movie, and most emotional and impactful of all is the sort of adoptive father-son relationship between Yondu and Peter Quill. Since this is a Guardians of the Galaxy movie, I, of course, can't forget to talk about the music. Awesome Mix Volume 2 is another extremely fun 70s pop rock compilation. I would argue that the second mix is a little bit more diverse, with a bigger range of mega hits and deep cut tracks. Looking Glass, Electric Light Orchestra, Jay and the Americans, Cheap Trick were once again treated to a set of bands and songs I've loved for decades, all fitting into the narrative of the story, which is just so cool. So even though Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is quite different from its predecessor in a number of ways, it never loses the core, foundational style and character aspects that endeared us to the Guardians of the Galaxy in the first place. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number 1 is the characters. This is a pro holdover from the first film, but once again, it's the characters that really make this movie. There's less of a plot this time around, so the characters are even more important in Volume 2. Luckily, they more than get the job done. We get to spend some time on each of the Guardians individually, exploring the variety of problems or conflicts they're experiencing, but we also see them continuing to work together as a team and as a family. Drax and Baby Groot are the standouts, but all of the protagonists are enjoyable, including team newcomer Mantis. The villains are still a little mixed, but at least an improvement over the first film, and Nebula and Yondu continue to surprise by being some of the most interesting and dynamic characters of the bunch. The second pro has got to be the family theme. It does get a little heavy-handed at times, and some of the stuff with Ego especially takes on a distinctly after-school special vibe, but for the most part, this thematic core is really strong. It expands on the found family elements of the first movie and really focuses on the strength of family bonds between non-blood relatives. This family theme pops up over and over again throughout the course of the movie. Quill and Ego's relationship is the most obvious and central to the plot, but there's also Gamora and Nebula, Mantis and the Guardians, especially Drax, Yondu and the other Ravager factions, Yondu and Quill, and of course, the Guardians with one another. These various family relationships really bring the heart and emotion to this sequel. Pro number 3 is the soundtrack. Well, this is an obvious one if you know me. I love music, and classic rock is among my favorites, so just like the first film, Awesome Mix Volume 2 is loaded with bands and songs I've loved since I was a kid. There's a bit more of a tonal mix to the songs this time, as well as a good mix of hits, one-hit wonders, and deep cuts. Cheap Trick, ELO, Cat Stevens, Jay and the Americans, Looking Glass, Sam Cooke. Once again, I'm so happy that bands I've loved for years are getting a nice popularity resurgence and being newly discovered by people thanks to Guardians of the Galaxy. On the con side, the biggest issue is the structure. At first glance, I'd be tempted to associate the problem with the plot or story's focus, but I actually don't mind the comparatively low-key character study nature of this movie. It's not the same type of space adventure as the first film, but this one's still got a lot of huge action sequences and exploration. I've found that the issue largely lies with the way in which the storyline is delivered. It's structured kind of oddly. It's not awful, but it is definitely choppy as we cut among the different storylines. The film also is a little deceptive in its structure. The Guardians' introduction sets up the storyline that we're led to believe is going to be the main focus, and later provides an offshoot to Ego's planet that's presented as an aside from the main plot, only to have that aside suddenly become the main plotline. Again, not bad, just a bit strange, and a focal transition that probably could have been handled a little more smoothly. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 4 out of 5 paws. It's a fun, humor and heart-filled follow-up sequel that puts extra focus on its characters. The story and structure suffer a bit as a result, but the emotion and laughs keep this an engaging space adventure. I would recommend Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 to people who liked the first Guardians of the Galaxy. The story goes in a slightly different direction, but this really hones in on the characters, and there's even more underlying emotion to their interactions than the first time around. Things get a bit weird, but that's consistent with the Guardians of the Galaxy brand. Likewise, if you want some more 70s classic rock favorites and a few deep cuts, Volume 2 will offer up a satisfying mixtape. If you liked Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, I would recommend Guardians of the Galaxy. Probably not much of a surprise with this first recommendation at least, but you really can't give a more fitting one. Guardians of the Galaxy acts as an origin story for this team, not only introducing the 5 Guardians, plus a few antagonistic characters, but also establishing the humor, style, and music choices of the franchise. If you want some more galaxy fun, you should check out Galaxy Quest. In addition to the naming similarities, this movie also shares in its space-based blend of humor and heart, and features another memorable asteroid field chase. And if you want another superhero movie about found family, you might want to watch Shazam. Jumping over to the DC side of things, this is another fun, comedy-forward film that focuses on a hero realizing that their found family is actually more of a family to them than their blood relatives are. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite movie about a father-son relationship? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information on this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.